to show the added value there, and unfortunately for a lot of ITOs, they can't see that.
Call Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to pick up on where my colleague Grant Robertson left off in terms of Part 2, specifically clauses 24 and 25 of this Act. And as my colleague iterated, this is the part of the bill where the fees are set, where the Education Act as amendment and the fees are set. And I just want to consider what some of the submitters came and talked about when they talked about how it was those fees were going to be utilised. And my colleague Grant Robertson has set out very well what the function and the relationship between the New Zealand Qualification Authority and the industry training organisations are. And I think we had some very considered responses to what that relationship was, how these fees that are gathered under this Part 2 of the bill, how they're going to be used and what that regulatory concern is. In fact, Mr Chairman, it would be fair to say that part of the concerns that we expressed in relation to Part 1 of the bill, in terms of how it was that non-ITOs were going to be able to have access to the direct funding that had previously been solely for ITOs, is actually the lack of regulatory compliance, the lesser amount of regulatory requirement that there is there for non-ITOs. But Mr Chairman, returning to Part 2 and specifically what this bit of the legislation is doing, I think one of the most powerful statements here is when we had one of the ITOs come to us and talk about in relationship between their ITO, Career Force in this case, and NCQA, talked in a very compelling way about the need for a partnership between these two organisations. And my colleague Grant Robertson has already talked very eloquently about the need for there to be this scrutiny and the transparency of our ITOs, and I don't think that's something that we would ever question. But I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that the ITOs really had a considered way in which they were going to work in with NZQA. And I think another very compelling submission that we heard was from the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, the CTU on this, who had some very interesting things to say about the legislation. And as we've already talked about in Part 1 of this bill, the other aspects of their submission is something the Contractors Federation agreed with absolutely wholeheartedly. But they talked about whether or not the bill provides that the NZQA can set quality assurance requirements without limitation in respect to the management, operation and governance of ITOs. These provisions come on top of the requirements that are already there in the Act in respect to governance and other matters, and the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions considered that this was a step too far. So their main concern was that this provision represented a tipping point for industry training, and given the significant restructuring of ITOs that has already occurred and that we've seen over a number of years, the new performance standards that are in place for ITOs, the reduced funding and now a major review, that in many ways some of the changes that we're seeing in this legislation are coming out to, there's a risk that the visibility of ITOs as an organisation is now under threat, is what they argued. It was in this context that they proposed that the quality assurance aspect, that role of NCQA, would be less burdensome for the ITOs, have less discretion and should not duplicate or extend quality assurance requirements that are already provided for in the Act or through the role of the Tertiary Education Committee. So in the rush to open this up and let other players in, there is a real danger that, in the words of the Career Force submission, that we're really going to lose that partnership that we really need to be seeing between our ITOs and the New Zealand Qualifications Authority. Because if we are going to have quality skills training in New Zealand, if we are going to have quality apprenticeship training in New Zealand, I think all of us in this House agree that there has to be some rigorous monitoring of what their teaching is, as with any part of our education system, that there are standards, and we need to be assured that people who are undertaking their education are being taught to that standing and that there is a monitoring authority. It is simply the way in which we prefer to see how it is. that we run education in this country. But it's not clear what role the NZQA will have in respect to quality assurance in relation to the funding agreements of the non-ITOs. And I think that's something that is a real concern for us, and something I'd like to hear an opposition government member take a call on.
I'm going to call. I'll have the other doctor, Dr. David Clark.
Very kind, Mr. Chair.
It's Doctor's Day.
Thank you for the call. Of course, we should reiterate the